All right, let's talk about the Titanic. It's a story everyone thinks they know, right? You know, the big ship, the iceberg, a really tragic sinking. But what if I told you the real story is, well, it's way stranger, a lot more complex, and so much more human than the legend we've all heard. So, let's dive right in. So back in 1912, this is what it cost to build the largest, most luxurious ship the world had ever laid eyes on. It was a floating palace, you know, the absolute pinnacle of technology, a real ship of dreams. Now, adjusted for inflation, that's about $190 million today, a huge amount of money. Just kind of keep that number in your head for a second.
Because, get this was the budget for James Cameron's movie back in 1997. That's right. When you adjust for inflation, the movie about the sinking actually cost way more to make than the real ship cost to build. And trust me, that is just the first of many mind-blowing facts we're going to get into.
Okay, so here's our game plan. We're going to start with the myth, the legend of the unsinkable ship. Then we'll meet some of the incredible people who were actually on board. We'll uncover the chain of fatal mistakes that led to the disaster, look at the brutal, honest numbers of the sinking, and finally, explore the ship's legacy that still echoes today. First things first, we have to set the stage. You see, the Titanic wasn't just another ship. Oh no, it was a statement. It was a giant symbol of human ambition, of industrial power, and everyone was calling it practically unsinkable. To really get a sense of this thing, just look at the numbers. We're talking 883 feet long. That's longer than the tallest skyscrapers of its time. It burned through over 800 tons of coal every single day. And the main anchor? It was so massive that it took a team of 20 horses just to drag it into place. This thing was a man-made titan. But of course, a ship, no matter how big, is really all about its people. And the Titanic was carrying a fascinating slice of society, from the absolute richest people in the world all the way to poor immigrants who were just hoping for a new start in America. And at the very top of that first-class passenger list was a man who wasn't just rich, he was, by a lot of measures, the richest man on the planet. A true titan of America's Gilded Age. John Jacob Astor IV was so much more than just a rich guy. I mean, he was a decorated war veteran, he published a science fiction novel, and he was the real estate genius who built the iconic Waldorf Astoria Hotel. He was coming back from his honeymoon with his new and much younger wife, who happened to be pregnant. She made it onto a lifeboat. He and his dog Kitty did not.
Now, let's shift to a story that, honestly, almost defies belief. Let me introduce you to Violet Jessup. She was a nurse and a stewardess who had this bizarre, fateful connection to all three of the Titanic's sister ships.
This is just unbelievable. In 1911, she's on the RMS Olympic when it smashes into a warship. A year later, she's ordered into a lifeboat from the deck of the sinking Titanic. And then, get this, 4 years after that, she's on the HMHS Britannic when it hits a mine and sinks in under an hour. I mean, to survive one of these disasters is crazy. To survive 3 on ships that were all supposedly unsinkable, it's just incredible.
So, from the incredibly lucky, we now turn to the incredibly vulnerable. The youngest person on that entire ship was just a baby, only 2 months old.
You know, little Milvina Dean and her family were never even supposed to be on the Titanic. A coal strike messed up their plans, and they were transferred at the very last minute. Her dad felt the ship hit the iceberg, rushed his family up to the deck, and made sure his wife and kids got into a lifeboat. He went down with the ship. Milvina, she went on to become the last living survivor, passing away in 2009.
So the big question is, how did this ship of dreams, carrying all these precious lives, turn into one of the worst disasters in history? Well, the truth is it wasn't just one thing. It was this whole cascade of fatal and completely preventable human errors.
6. Just remember that number. That's how many iceberg warnings the Titanic's radio operators got on the day of the sinking. 6 different messages from other ships, all warning about ice fields directly in their path, and they were either dismissed or worse, they never even made it to the bridge.
And if that wasn't bad enough, up in the crow's nest, the lookouts were basically working blind. The key to the locker where the binoculars were kept, yeah, it was left behind in port. So the guys up there had to rely on just their eyes, on a moonless night with an ocean that was so calm it was almost impossible to spot an iceberg.
And look, this wasn't just some hindsight thing. Frederick Fleet, the actual lookout who spotted the danger, rang the bell and screamed, "Iceberg right ahead." He was haunted for the rest of his life. He truly believed that if he just had those binoculars, they could have saved the ship.
And this really gets to the fatal overconfidence at the heart of the whole story. The Titanic was designed to carry 64 lifeboats. But because they didn't want the decks to look cluttered and because, she was unsinkable, she sailed with only 20. Now, technically this was legal at the time, but it was only enough room to save about a third of the people on board.
So all these terrible errors just built up and led to the brutal reality of that night. And when you look at the numbers, they don't lie. They paint this absolutely horrifying picture of chaos, of inequality, and of terrible loss.
The final count is just chillin'. Out of more than 2,200 people on that ship, over 1,500 lost their lives in the freezing cold North Atlantic. Only 705 people survived. The unsinkable ship became a tomb for most of its passengers and crew.
But who survived and who died, it was not random. This chart tells a really stark story. 97% of the women in first class were saved. Now compare that to the men in second class. Only 8% survived. Your chance of living that night depended hugely on your gender and maybe even more on how much you paid for your ticket.
But the story didn't just end when the ship disappeared beneath the waves. In the days and even decades that followed, the Titanic sent shockwaves all around the world. And in a really cruel twist, the very first reports were completely wrong. They gave this false hope to families who were desperate for news. Newspapers all over the world were reporting that everyone was safe, that the Titanic was being towed to shore. It was basically the fake news of 1912, and it made the real truth, when it finally came out, that much more devastating.
So for 73 long years, the Titanic's final resting place was a complete mystery. Expedition after expedition tried and failed to find the wreck, sitting 2.5 miles below the surface of the ocean. So how on earth was it finally found?
Okay, the answer to this sounds like it's straight out of a spy novel. Seriously. In 1985, this oceanographer, Robert Ballard, was on a top-secret U.S. Navy mission to find 2 lost nuclear submarines. The Navy basically told him, "Hey, you can use our deep-sea tech to look for the Titanic, but only if you find our submarines first." So with just days left in his mission, he found the Titanic, completely by accident, while he was on a covert military operation. You can't make this stuff up.
So what does this all mean in the end? The Titanic is so much more than just a shipwreck. It's this incredibly powerful cautionary tale. And it makes you wonder, was this just a tragic one-time accident? Or is it a timeless warning about the very real dangers of putting absolute faith in our technology and of believing that anything we build can ever be truly unsinkable? It's something to think about.